Hey, this is Mohal Joshi from Los Angeles, California. I follow Indian foreign policy and defense with a special focus on Asia. You can follow me on Twitter at Mohal Joshi.
Hey, this is Kishor from Bengaluru in India. I am an international relations expert specializing in global security, conflict resolution, and international negotiation. My focus areas include peace building and digital diplomacy. You can find me on Twitter at Veggie Diplomat.
Hello and welcome to episode 14 of India Rising Strategic Affairs Conversations with Mohal and Kishor, a show in which we analyze the happenings from around the world and their impact on India. Before we begin, we have a programming note to share. We had been receiving multiple requests from our listeners to make our episodes available on podcasts. We have heard you and we are now present there as well. Starting our previous episode, you can now listen to all new episodes in SoundCloud or in any other podcast application. That's not all. You can also listen to all our earlier episodes also in those platforms. Remember that we will continue to be present in YouTube as well. Okay, so let's start with episode 14. But just a recap of our episode 13, where we had described the details of the Pulwama attack, of how Jaish-e-Mohammed had carried out a VB-IED attack, a vehicle-borne IED attack, killing 40 CRPF jawans. And we had also explained the various possibilities in terms of Indian response. And we had explained military, diplomatic, economic, and many such measures that India could take. So it was quite clear that India went in for a full spectrum of response, but we'll begin with the most important one of them, the military response. So on the 26th of February, the DGISPR, which is the Director General of Intelligence Services Public Relations of the Pakistani military, he tweeted disclosing to the whole world that the Indian fighter jets had violated the Pakistani airspace, and the Pakistanis had responded by pushing the Indian jets back, and that was when the whole world got to know. And a few hours later, the MEA, the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, also announced that India had actually conducted aerial strikes on not just one but three different locations, not only in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, but also in a place called Balakot in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province in northern part of Pakistan. And the spokesperson clearly mentioned that this was a non-military preemptive strike, which was the first time that many analysts was hearing this kind of a term. So basically what India meant was that it was a preemptive strike, indicating that India had clear intelligence information telling that the Jaish-e-Mohammed group was planning to carry out further attacks, and that they were in that terror camp at that particular moment, and India chose to destroy the camp. And it was non-military in the sense that India did neither target counter-force targets or counter-value targets. In other words, in simple words, India did not target either the Pakistani military or Pakistani civilian establishments, and it was plainly targeted at the Jaish-e-Mohammed terror camp. Having said that, India said that this was the end of Indian response, and India would continue to claim its right for self-defense whenever there is a need. Now, this was what happened on day one, and this was met with a lot of celebration and euphoria across India on February 26th. But Pakistan did not take lightly to this. It was some kind of an embarrassment for the Pakistani establishment, including the military. And the very fact that Indian jets had not only crossed the LOC, but also crossed over into Pakistan proper and had returned back without any much of a stiff response or a stiff opposition from the Pakistani Air Force, actually had a telling blow to the Pakistani establishment, and they indicated that they would respond back kindly in the near future. And before we get into Pakistani response, we'll have to delve deeper into the Indian strikes. So, Mohal, enough of me talking. If you can begin with the entire strike on the terror camp in Balakot and bring listeners up to speed with the defense aspect of it.
Yeah. So early on 26th morning, like the 12 Mirage 2000s, which is one of India's air-to-ground premier defense attack aircraft, they took off from the Gwalior Air Force Station, and they were joined by one refueler, like a mid-air refueler, like an IL-78, and Netra, an indigenous airborne early warning and a control system, are called as the AWACS. And there was one more, an Israeli Heron UAV for real-time surveillance. So after probably getting refueled, they headed over the border, entering somewhere in like from the line of control, and they headed towards the Balakot target, and they bombed it with Spice 2000 guided bombs. So now what, and also they were joined, one more point is that they were joined by Sukhoi 30s for defense, and also MiG 29s were reported to have been assigned to provide escort in case there was some retaliation against this Mirage 2000s, which would be heavily loaded down by bombs. So the air-to-air aspect would be handled by the Sukhoi 30, which is India's premier air-to-air combat fighter, and Mirage 29s. So coming to the strike, after they crossed over the line of control, once inside Pakistani held territory, they released standoff weapons with a Spice 2000 guided kit bomb. So what this does is Spice stands for Smart, Precise, Impact and Cost Effective Guidance Kit. It is made by Israel, and what it does is basically it takes a dumb bomb which has basically no guidance, and you put the kit on top of it, and it converts into a surface smart guided air to surface munition. Now friends, this is not like a missile where you can just launch it from anywhere. It would be, you would still have to be in the right envelope to launch it. It's kind of a in layman's term, like a glider kind of thing. Like once you launch it, it will automatically guide itself through GPS to its final target. And it's also supposed to be have anti GPS jamming features. So once the GPS coordinates, if fed correctly, it will strike the target with precision. It's sort of like a fire and forget weapon, but it has basically no propulsion on it. So this was the story on the air attacks, airstrikes, and then after the airstrikes, Pakistan supposedly did scramble some fighters, like namely the F-16s, to intercept it. But by the time the fighters were back into Indian airspace safely, and they returned back without a scratch after delivering the payload at Balakot. Kishore?
And yeah, and the funny part was how the DGISPR tweet mentioned that we forced the Indian jets to return back, and in haste, in a hurry to return back, the Indian jets had dropped a payload. That was a funny way of telling that we had bombed them. So that was actually funny. And before the Indian side had actually confirmed that they had conducted these strikes, every analyst was kind of deciphering how bombing was being mentioned in such a sweet way of dropping a payload. So that was a funny part associated with it.
Yeah, I
So
mean, sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead, go ahead, go ahead, go
No, I
ahead.
mean, this is just shows that this was the one of the several examples of the enemy's propaganda over the
Hmm.
past 1 week that everybody has been now well subjected to.
Correct. So technically, it was very clear that Pakistan was on the back foot in this particular scenario, and that they
Mm-hmm.
wanted to claim the moral high ground, and also show to the world that they were not caught on the back foot. So they were trying to make the most out of the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can quickly switch over to the Pakistani response then, Mohal.
Yeah, so the next morning around 10 a.m. was when the Pakistani response to the events happened. It was quite it was a big, quick, and uh, it was a pretty what I'm looking for is they did respond pretty quickly than what many had expected.
Mm-hmm.
So as per reports, like there were around 24 Pakistani Air Force jets, a mix of the American F-16, the really, I would really old the Mirage 3s and the JF-17s, which got airborne from a series of air bases in Pakistan and Pakistan occupied Kashmir. Now, they did do some maneuvers. I mean, they remained in the over for more than half an hour in an act of deception. The Indian airborne early warning assets had picked up the movement with the bases in like Srinagar and Punjab alerted. Now, the Pakistani fighter package did turn uh, away from the line of control, but there were a small bunch of fighters, like probably three, which just turned west towards India. Sorry, turned east towards India. Now,
Yeah.
they so the once the bulk of the fighters did turn back into Pakistani territory, some of them continue to come into India. Now, at that precise moment when India realized that these were breaching Indian airspace, we did have a large bunch of fighters up in the air. Now, I have received questions from even some of my acquaintances like, okay, why didn't we use this Su-30 MKI? It is the premier air-to-air combat fighter. But the reality is that you deploy whatever assets are there in that area. So there were some Sukhoi MKI jets to let everybody know, but they were on doing a combat a CAP, or as we call combat air patrols, further away from the area, and then they were diverted to provide cover for the intercept. But the closest fighters were the two mixed 21s from Srinagar, which headed straight for the intercept. Now, uh, the Pakistanis, Kishor, correct me if I'm wrong, were able to drop some bombs on, I guess, nothing. I mean, they were like no significant military targets. As per the reports, they were heading to bomb some military installations, which would be a biggie, pretty escalation in
Mm-hmm.
terms of a war type situation. So, uh, they were intercepted by the MiG-21s. A fight did occur, like a dog fight did occur, which is basically two planes fighting each other. Uh, Interestingly, in this today's day and age, we all talk about the beyond visual range fighting, but interestingly, the dogfight did happen within visual range, as VWR, as it referred to, and uh, like the one of the MiG-21s did manage to knock down a F-16. Now, the F-16 wreckage didn't fall in Indian territory, but there is strong circumstantial evidence to show that we did knock down one of their planes. However, Wing Commander Abhinandan, who I'm guessing everybody in India knows by now, I mean, it could be the fog of war situation or whatever, like error. Maybe he crossed over into the line of control, and he was knocked down either by a Pakistani air defense system or by a Pakistani fighter jet. We don't know. So he ended up landing behind enemy lines, um, and was captured by the local forces on the ground. So,
Mm-hmm.
and then one last thing. I mean, there's been a lot of debate whether we did shoot down an F-16 or there's a lot of strong circumstantial evidence, but only time will tell if it's proven. Now, the reason I say this is like significant is because when US sold Pakistan F-16s, the agreement was they would be used for counter-terrorism and not for aggressive action against another state or nation. So, as per reports, US has started to make inquiries because the reports from India has said that they did use F-16, and I guess Kishore, you will go into some of the details later on. So I'll leave it there for now, and I guess you can mention to the viewers what happened with Wing Commander Abhinandan once he was shot down, and how he was released back to India.
Yeah, before we go there, just another point to emphasize on the fog of war scenario. At the same time that this dogfight was happening and Pakistani jets had violated the Indian airspace, coincidentally, Mi-17 chopper had crash landed in Budgam, which is much closer to Srinagar. And initially, people thought that this was also related to the intrusion by the Pakistani jets. And in all the conclusion, even the Pakistanis thought that they were responsible for the crash landing of the chopper, and they also claimed the responsibility for it. But that was when everybody started analyzing and trying to understand if at all Pakistan had violated Indian airspace at multiple points, simply because the initial violation happened in the Rajouri sector, close to Sundarbani, and Budgam is far away from Rajouri, any which way you see. So it was much later in the day that even Pakistanis clarified that they had nothing to do with the chopper crash, and just that it happened coincidentally on the same day. But in this kind of a fog of war scenario where nothing is clear at that moment, um, such news keeps circulating, and it does not help any one bit. Having said that, coming to Wing Commander Abhinandan's drop in Pakistan occupied Kashmir, there was one article in Pakistani newspaper Dawn, which is kind of equivalent to New York, the Pakistani New York Times. It was mentioned that Wing Commander Abhinandan, after ejecting and landing in POK, he kind of inquired with the locals if he was in India, realized that he was not, and by that time the people there realized that he was an Indian pilot, an enemy pilot, and they started chasing him. Abhinandan had no other option but to take out a pistol and try to defend himself. And he ran backwards for about 200 meters. That's what the Dawn article tells. And found a pond nearby and tried to not only chew the Indian map that he had, the map of the location that he had, but also tried to dampen one part of the map in the pond, in the waters there. However, the mob grew stronger and stronger, bigger and bigger, and he was quickly overpowered. And in the confusion and in the anger, in the frenzy, the mob attacked him, and those visuals came out, and this kind of enraged the Indian government. But due to some quick thinking by the Pakistani military who were also present in that area, they quickly captured him and ensured that no more harm is done to him, and they took him to the barracks, to the close by barracks there. And that was when they started recording questions, recording the answers that were given by him. One first time when he was blindfolded, where he was able to identify himself by name and the service number, and that was generally enough to identify yourself as a soldier from the opposite armed forces. Now, having said that, this is sufficient to actually treat the soldier well, because at this stage the Geneva Convention kicks in, and you have to treat him in a humane manner. You should not subjugate him to any mental or physical harassment. So this was a quick video bite that was splashed on media all over, and a little while later they also I think sanity prevailed, and they kind of provided him a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, and started asking him more detailed questions. But by now, earlier Wing Commander was a little rattled, possibly due to the fall and the very fact that he was in enemy territory. But by the second time, when he was being recorded, he was far more confident, and in fact, he started controlling the conversation as well, where he flatly denied or flatly refused to answer any of the questions which needed a crucial or critical answer. So in that way, Wing Commander Abhinandan's response under trying circumstances was kind of appreciated by everyone back home in India, and that was where people realized that crossing enemy lines is not at all easy. By then, there was quite a bit of sympathy pouring in for the Wing Commander, and there was quite a bit of frustration and sadness also, because by then it was already evening, and people were wondering. I think this should be. People were actually kind of attempting to impress on the government to stop the escalation at the stage, try to de-escalate and ensure that Wing Commander Abhinandan is brought back. But I think we need to really go back all the way to 18 years ago, 19 years ago, when we had the Kargil War, and we had a similar situation where Lieutenant Saurabh Kalia and five people from five more soldiers from the 5 Jat regiment were actually combing the Kargil mountains, and they were caught by the Pakistani soldiers who were in the garb of Mujahideen. They had captured not only Lieutenant Saurabh Kalia but also the 5 other soldiers, and they took them away to POK. And later in the evening, they had announced in radio Skardu, which is a local radio channel in Pakistan occupied Kashmir, that they had captured these 5+1 Indian armed soldiers. And despite heavy opposition from India at that stage, actually, mind you, this was the beginning of the Kargil conflict at then, because that was how even the Indians got a confirmation that the Pakistanis had actually crossed over the line of control and had captured the vital mountain tops in the Kargil sector. And once the Indians heard about it in the radio announcement, Indians did oppose it vehemently. They also sent out demarches to the Pakistani establishment, but nothing concrete happened out of it. And about 16 or 17 days later, Pakistan handed back the dead body of Saurabh Kalia in a badly mutilated state. The body of Saurabh Kalia, once post-mortem was conducted, it was very clear that he was tortured to death. And Pakistan kept denying this accusation, and no matter what pressure India applied, Pakistan managed to go away scot-free. So for people who think that Pakistan was trying to capture the moral high ground in this particular situation, in the case of Wing Commander Abhinandan, I think it is pertinent that people do remember about a similar situation that had happened earlier, and how Pakistan had not only behaved badly, but also kind of managed to get away with it. Mohal?
Yeah, so the next we can, so Abhinandan was eventually released to Indian authorities. So can you go through the process of how the conversations happened between the Indian and the Pakistani sides, and how it was eventually released within, I would say, little over than 48 hours, or little more than 48 hours?
Yes. So when the day before, when Pakistan announced that they had actually violated Indian airspace, and they claimed that the Indian jets had, in the retaliation, crossed over into Pakistani airspace, and they had shot down one or two or three Indian jets. And India clarified that they had lost only one fighter jet and that one pilot was missing in action. Now, at that point itself, India clearly went on a diplomatic offensive. They summoned the Deputy High Commissioner of Pakistan in New Delhi. Remember, the High Commissioner is back in Islamabad at this particular moment. So the highest authority in the High Commissioner's office was actually the Deputy High Commissioner. So he was summoned, and India told in no uncertain terms that Geneva Convention applies in the case of Wing Commander Abhinandan, and that he has to be released at the earliest. And in fact, apparently, it has now come to light that India made several India gave several options to Pakistan, telling that we will send an IAF plane, Indian Air Force plane, and we can once you release him, we can bring him back. But apparently, Pakistan began saying that we will consider the option of releasing Wing Commander Abhinandan, but a little later they started telling that we will release Wing Commander only if India de-escalates at least for a minimum period of 48 hours. Now, by this time, India had enough of this dilly-dallying from Islamabad, and India sent out strong opposition to all this, telling that the release of Wing Commander Abhinandan was not negotiable in any which manner. And by that time, even internationally as well, Pakistan had no other option but to release Wing Commander Abhinandan, simply because the US or China or the European Union did not make any overtures to support Pakistan's holding of the soldiers. So it was quite clear that Pakistan had to release him. The only major question was when would they do it? Now, while we were doing all this, India also went on a military offensive as well. When I mean military offensive, what happened was that India announced that on, I think it was on the 28th or 27th, sorry, 27th or the 28th, I don't remember the date, but
20th.
the 28th, thank you. So on that day, evening, 5 p.m., there would be a press conference by all the three service chiefs, and that India would announce its further course of action. Yeah, so the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan was left with no option but to consider releasing Wing Commander at the earliest. Apparently, he had made a statement in the Pakistani parliament about the escalating situation between India and Pakistan. He did not mention about the Wing Commander whom Pakistan had captured. He ended his speech, he went out of the hall, and as a matter of fact, he came back within a few minutes and made a statement saying that, oh, I forgot to add that we are going to release Wing Commander tomorrow. So it was quite clear that the Prime Minister was taking instructions from elsewhere, and that he was not the highest decision-making authority out there at that particular situation. So it was quite clear that Wing Commander would be released the next day. So India had to kind of calibrate its response from that point onwards. That is why the service chiefs just mentioned that India would continue to be in a state of readiness, but also went hammer and tongs about how Pakistan had used F-16 in all this attack and counter-attack situation. Mohal, we now want to talk about the airspace closure.
Yeah, so basically, like, as you might have already heard, that Pakistani airspace has been closed for the past few days, and Kishor, as we speak, I believe it's still closed. Correct me if I'm wrong. Also, like, I think you did some open source intelligence work on tracking flights out of Pakistan. The reason I say this is especially is because there was a rumor floating around that once the airspace was closed, there was a few flights from Pakistan to Saudi Arabia, and the rumor on social media was that they were carrying nuclear weapons from Pakistan to Saudi Arabia, which seemed a bit outlandish to me. So could you comment on this airspace closure and this particular rumor, both of them?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So the airspace closure came up simply because there was violation of airspace on both the sides of the line of control. The northern part of India, up above New Delhi, India closed its airspace for any kind of traffic, not just domestic civilian, but also international civilian traffic. And the same happened in Pakistan as well. But the only difference being that Pakistan closed its entire airspace, not just in the border areas bordering India. Now, having said that, Pakistan continued with its combat aerial patrolling, where it would use its fighter jets to patrol the border space, and also not only during the day but also during the night. Now, when this happened, obviously Pakistan was left embarrassed simply because it could not defend its airspace when India struck on Balakot. So this was a way for the Pakistani establishment to instill confidence in the Pakistani people to show that they were guarding the airspace quite aggressively. But in all this melee, Pakistan resorted to blackouts in all the major cities, and people were clearly instructed not to use either generators or UPS. So Pakistan, we had quite a bit of media clippings showing the kind of absolute blackouts that the Pakistanis were facing. But in those dark videos, you could hear the fighter jets roaming around over the major cities in Pakistan. Now, having said that, the Pakistani airspace was relaxed only for a small duration, and this happened, I think, on Thursday. And what happened was that three or four flights took off from Pakistan and headed towards Saudi Arabia, and one of them headed to the United Arab Emirates. And there was quite a bit of rumor telling that Pakistan is actually transferring its nukes out of the country, which was actually quite uh, funny and stupid at the same time, simply because one sovereign power would never give away its nuclear powers to another sovereign power, no matter how close they are or no matter what kind of bonhomie they share. Um, so I got a chance to kind of do a little more research on this, and eventually we found out that these were normal passenger jets of not only Pakistan International Airlines and also of Saudi Arabian Airlines and the Air Arabian flight. So they were actually repositioning themselves back. A few of them were going back to Emirates, and a few of them were going back to Saudi. And Pakistani flights similarly came back to Pakistan. They were actually stuck in Saudi and UAE. So these came back. So effectively, what you had was exchange of civilian aircraft, and in aviation language we call them repositioning. So there was fuss about nothing actually, Mohal.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I say outlandish is because, see, I mean, your nuclear weapons, especially in terms of Pakistan, uh, versus a much larger India, is deterrence. Now, you could be, I mean, in theory, sharing your nuclear technology or your bombs with a friend in peace times, but in times when war is allegedly supposed to break out, why would you give up your assets that would give you your strategic deterrence against India? So it completely made no sense to send away nuclear weapons when you could be at the precipice of war, even though, I mean, you and me both agree that we are not at the precipice of war. So yeah, I mean, it's just
And
like lack of critical thinking by many folks. And
yeah, and also simply because many of the terror groups in Pakistan would actually love the situation where they would actually lay hands on these nuclear bombs or nuclear material, So it was actually quite foolish that way also to consider that these were being transferred out of Pakistan.
Yeah, I mean, on the nuclear part, I mean, still, like, I mean, many of these warheads are demated, which means the triggers and the actual fissile material and the bombs and everything would be kept in separate locations. I mean, now with the tension rising, they could have been brought in closer, but I mean, it's just like bizarre, this story, Anyways, so moving on the diplomatic side, the UNSC resolution and the OIC meet were two important steps which happened this week. So, Kishore, could you enlighten us on these two topics?
Yeah, so much before the Indian military response, India went on a diplomatic offensive, and it kind of convinced France to actually take up cudgels in this matter. And France, in close partnership with UK and the US, started convincing all the Security Council members, both permanent and non-permanent members, to retable the proposal to actually tag both Maulana Masood Azhar as a global terrorist and his organization, the Jaish-e-Mohammed, as a global terror group. So India was hoping for some kind of attraction there, and France came to India's help in that matter. And looks like France is actually also taking up the initiative to actually convince China in this regard. And possibly, Mohal, we were actually talking about this a few days ago, and I think it would be pertinent for China to actually take a step back. May not be a step back, but at least kind of have a tactical pause to say that, okay, in this regard, this one time, we will not oppose the proposal that France is tabling, and it would not be a embarrassment either for China or for Pakistan, simply because I think time is running out for the Jaish-e-Mohammed group and Maulana Masood Azhar, simply because even China, when they had exercised their veto last time, it was only on technical grounds and not on any materialistic evidence. So I think France would want China to do exactly that, to kind of abstain or not exercise veto in this regard. And I think that would be icing on the cake for the Indian establishment. Now, having said that, with respect to the Security Council, India also went on an offensive with regards to the OIC members, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Remember that there was a foreign ministers meeting that was chaired in Abu Dhabi by the Prince of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh bin Zayed, and he had invited the Indian Foreign Minister of External Affairs, Sushma Swaraj, of how she could actually give. She was the guest of honor at the plenary session, and this riled up Pakistan. And Shah Mahmood Qureshi, the foreign minister of Pakistan, openly threatened that Pakistan would boycott the OIC plenary meet if UAE did not revoke its invitation to Sushma Swaraj. Now, Pakistan actually kind of brought in a lot of pressure on UAE, but looks like UAE did not budge, and Pakistan ended up not attending the OIC meet. And this is actually a rare feat, simply because Pakistan itself is a founding member of the OIC. Having said that, I would want to bring in a small amount of trivia. Now, in 1969, the King Hassan of Morocco, he invited government of India for the 1969 summit in Rabat, but the then ruler of Pakistan, General Yahya Khan, the dictator, he threatened to walk out, and King Hassan had to request the Indian delegates not to attend the meeting. This was after the Indian delegate had actually reached the destination. So it was quite a bit of embarrassment for India in 1969 at the OIC plenary meet. And fast forward 50 years, we see tables turning completely, where India ended up hogging all the limelight at the inauguration of the plenary meet, and Pakistan staying out simply because India had been invited. Now, although there was some amount of statement being made on uh, Kashmir situation and how generally OIC continues to have an anti-India stand when it comes to Kashmir. But in the final declaration, there was no mention of Kashmir. The final declaration had mention of Palestine, had mention of Yemen, but somehow it did not have any mention of Pakistan, of Kashmir. I beg your pardon. So I think in that regard, it was a diplomatic victory yet again for the Indian establishment. And Pakistan kind of felt angry that its request was not being considered by UAE. So this was with regards to diplomatic offensive from India. Mohal?
Yeah, so I think coming back to the 30,000 feet view on this, I mean, there's been a lot of debate on the strike and its efficacy, and I mean, how many buildings were damaged, or how many lives were, how many terrorists were eliminated. I think a lot of that is still like being analyzed by experts, and there's going to be vigorous debate on both sides whether this was an effective airstrike or not. But I think what the bigger picture people are missing is that first time since the 1971 war, um, the line of control has been crossed. Now, if you remember during the Kargil War, which was the other war before the 1971 war, like the Vajpayee government has specially told the Indian Air Force to not willingly cross the line of control. I mean, there could be some cases where inadvertently you might cross. So this is a huge change in the mindset, similar to the surgical strikes done in 2016, that there are no more inhibitions to cross the LOC. And mind you, we didn't just cross the LOC, there would be also like this bombing took place in proper Pakistan, in Khyber Pakhtunwala. So even international boundaries were crossed to take the necessary military action. Now, there have been also some reports that we doubted we crossed the LOC or not. Now, remember, the Spice guided bomb kit has a range of 60 kilometers as advertised by the company which manufactures it. Now, as the crow flies, the nearest post in India, uh, Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir is like 80 kilometers away. So you can do the math that basically you would have to have crossed the line of control to bomb it. You might not have be actually over the site to bomb it. You could still be at a little bit of a standoff distance, but there was definitely a crossing of the international boundary, sorry, of the line of control. Now, what this does is this sets a new threshold or template that any kind of terrorist attack will be met by a military response, which wasn't the case as seen in 2611, where the IF was ready to carry out airstrikes, but the political will was missing. So the political will is now has been set. So it will be it will sort of set a template for future governments, like whichever be in power. Like it could be the current government, it could be the opposition, that appropriate proportionate response has to be delivered, and such terrorist attacks won't go unchecked. Also, one more thing was that like Pakistan basically got no support from anywhere in the world. I mean, maybe an odd country did support after the Balakot airstrike. So this also is a sea change, because Kishor, I mean, maybe you can elaborate more on this. That after the 99 Kargil War, like US did intervene hard to stop the fighting, which the Vajpayee government pushed back at a lot of pressure to end the hostilities, and mentioned that once the intruders are thrown out from the heights of Kargil, we will stop the hostilities that are ongoing with Pakistan.
Yeah, right. So in case of Kargil War, which happened in 1999, just 1 year prior to that, in 1998, both India and Pakistan had conducted nuclear tests. So it was fresh in the memory of the major powers at that time. And the Kargil War was seen as a basket case scenario of how two nuclear powers would end up mitigating or actually controlling an escalation and not spiraling out of control into an out and out
Mhm,
nuclear
mhm, mhm, mhm,
catastrophe. So I think that was fresh in the minds, and Bill Clinton, the then U.S. president, had to use his officers to good effect
mhm, mhm,
to convince both the Indian establishment and the Pakistani establishment to keep things under control. And one of the promises taken from India at that point in time was that India would not cross the LOC under any
mhm,
circumstance.
mhm, mhm.
But
Yeah,
yeah, things have
yeah.
changed. Yeah, just
Mhm,
one more point. So things have changed, and at this time when the Pulwama terror attack happened, as we mentioned in our previous episode, the US clearly indicated that India was well within its right to self-defense, and that kind of set the precedent for India that India will not be shackled in any which way, and India could do anything that it found appropriate. Mohal?
yeah, yeah. I mean, this. I think you mentioned it well that Pakistan has been virtually isolated on the diplomatic stage,
Mm-hmm.
even though, like, I mean, they claim that their sovereignty was violated with the Balakot airstrike. What we have seen is like usually what we have seen in the past is especially the U.S. presidents like Bill Clinton or George Bush after the Parliament attack, or like even Obama later on, even though I mean the 26/11 did occur during the last days of the Bush administration, they've always taken a line that like the hostilities should be kept as a minimum so it doesn't spiral out of control. Now what's changed under Trump is that like Trump has a pretty a policy of like holding Pakistan accountable for their double speak with the US. So this has done a paradigm shift in the policy, like where US has taken a hands-off approach and has supported our right to conduct airstrikes in support of the retaliation to the terrorist attacks, and same with for the other countries. So I think that might that shows that the desperation of the Pakistanis, which was shown by the probably the sort of weird interviews given by Foreign Minister Qureshi to international media, who try to drum up support for Pakistan on the international stage that hey, we are under attack by India, and we need some leverage from you to tell India to back off. I mean, those were like pretty hilarious interviews where I think he almost admitted that we are in touch with Masood Azhar.
Right, and also indicated that Masood Azhar is very unwell, and India should actually back off from even thinking of doing anything to Masood Azhar.
I
Yeah,
mean,
but
but I mean,
go
thinking of
ahead.
unwell, like I mean, 2002, then President Musharraf already also declared that Bin Laden was unwell. So I mean, you have to take it with I guess, a whole bag of salt to say like he's unwell. I mean, it could be any kind of disinformation being spread out. And then the last thing about the threshold of all-out war. So I think last week I had briefly mentioned, and even on my piece on mind makers on the way forward for India. I mean, the thing I wanted to mention especially is that a lot of people, like, I mean, it's like a just lack of critical thinking in strategic affairs in India. I mean, we spend like 10 times or maybe a million times more energy on Bollywood, cricket, and in domestic politics, but I think not enough thought has been given to critical thinking or strategic affairs. Now, the problem I
Mhm.
see in India is today, like, there are two opposite camps, and I mean, they are well within their right. I mean, we are a democratic country to take their views, but that doesn't mean that's the right view. I mean, on one hand, you have the Aman Ki Asha's place, like, where like one of the young activists in there said, like, okay, war doesn't solve anything. We need peace, which is also like, I mean, kind of not foolish and not right. And on the other hand, we have the extreme. On the other hand, we say, like, let's have a full all-out war with India and like wipe them off the map, which doesn't help you because it would set India, it would finish Pakistan, but also set back India with by decades in terms of economic growth. So what people just think in the terms of these two binaries, that either you have uh, peace talks and no war, or you have all out nuclear war. I think there are a lot of options in the middle, like what the surgical strikes in 2016 and the Balakot airstrikes have shown, that there
Uh-huh.
could be a option in between where you could give a proportionate response without triggering an all-out war. Now, if Pakistan was to escalate, I mean, they would be at the receiving end. I mean, their finances are practically down to like they are on fumes, and cranking up the pressure in terms of these airspace closures. And I believe you mentioned a couple more measures, like it's going to turn the screws on them. So the main goal is like to give this proportionate response to sort of change their course, to change their behavior. We are not looking to like just clean out the nation or end its existence. We want a peaceful neighbor who doesn't incite terrorism inside our own country. The goal is not to wipe them off the map or blast them back to the stone age, as I wrote, but to use coercive measures like diplomacy and talks and dossiers and whatnot hasn't worked for like 20 to 30 years. The time has come that you use coercive diplomacy be with to change the behavior on the Pakistani side. Also, I think as you very well mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, it just the other problem in critical thinking is, okay, you use maybe a proportionate response and then you will change the behavior. It doesn't happen that way. You have to use all the tools in your toolbox, which is like strategic, diplomatic, and I think you touched brilliantly upon all those various points to change that behavior. I mean, we revoked the most favored nation status, and already, I mean, with the bizarre rant from the reporter on Tamatar ka jawab atom bomb se dege, you see that like it's hurting economically. So only when you use all the levers of statecraft to change the behavior, you see actual change on the ground. It's not going to happen overnight. Now, in this talk of military action, I mean, one must not forget the big picture that even if there is not much let's say if there's not a military response in the future, or maybe there is one, that one needs to use all the levers of statecraft, not just the military one, to put pressure on Pakistan to change its behavior on supporting terrorism. Kishore?
Yeah. So just to add on to what you were mentioning, Pakistan's behavior in all this has been quite all over the place. Frankly, there was one interview that Shah Mahmood Qureshi gave to CNN, where Christian Amanpour interviewed him, and he kind of clearly implied that Pakistani establishment was in touch with Jaish-e-Mohammed and Masood Azhar, and he blurted out that Masood Azhar was really unwell. One or 2 days later, he gave another interview to BBC, and he said that we know that they are not responsible for the Pulwama attack, although clearly Jaish-e-Mohammed themselves had mentioned that they were responsible for the Pulwama attack. So Pakistan was like all over the place when it comes to this. And also when the escalation reached its peak, Pakistan tried to use the moral high ground to claim that Pakistan cannot be forced to de-escalate first, claiming that that would risk a threat of Taliban talks falling apart. Now, the Western powers were not ready for this kind of nonsense from Pakistan, so Pakistan had to quickly step back from its threat of disrupting the Taliban talks, and they fell in place, and eventually they agreed to release Wing Commander, and that is where we are as of today. But coming to the Indian position, uh, it is quite important to note that India did not even make an official statement after Wing Commander was released. Whatever you see are under the radar, non-official kind of statements. Indian Air Force said that they were happy to get their pilot back, but that was the only bite that you received. Although Raksha Mantri Nirmala Sitaraman went and visited him in the hospital, But beyond that, there was nothing much in terms of an official statement. However, it continues. I mean, we need to emphasize that India continues to maintain an assertive posture, if not an out and out aggressive posture. And India has made it very clear, not only to Pakistan but also to international media, that India will continue to exercise self-defense and would not mind taking preemptive action if it comes to that, to dismantle any terror operations happening on the other side of line of control. So India continues to be on the vigil, both on the borders and beyond, in terms of gathering intelligence. And this would continue irrespective of the fact that India goes to polls within the next 5 to 8 weeks. Mind you, Indian elections are a long drawn out affair. So Indian government has decided that uh, this will not be a one-time response from India, and that this would be a long drawn-out process. Mohal?
Yeah, I think you brought it out well. That I mean, I don't know why some in the media have been calling this PR victory for Pakistan, which we don't believe it is. I mean, we did do perform a airstrike significantly deep within Pakistani territory, like almost like 80 kilometers or even further than that. While they did a shallow incursion, and they were quickly repelled with our mind you, like a really old MiG-21 fighter successfully. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
in the process, we did lose Wing Commander to the going over to the territory. So now in many uh, battles, in the heat of the battle, like there could be issues like this which could occur. So it wasn't any kind of strategic victory for Pakistan, as many in the public relations department have been calling it. The one thing I think which need to be done better is the public conference, the press conferences could have been better, well handled, and more information needs to be divulged. But I think we are just progressing on side of caution. But I mean, the message has been unambiguously sent to Pakistan that you are not safe anywhere in Pakistan. You cannot threaten us by staying below the nuclear umbrella thing. Think that there will be no consequences for India. I mean, the what I think, as someone mentioned to me, like, is we are in a sort of a tactical pause, and we are trying
Mm-hmm.
to review the strategies of what happened in the Pakistan air attack incursion into India, and we will have all the assets. I think, as the three chiefs said in the press conference, all the assets on sea, air, and land, and even I would say I would add subsurface from the Navy's statement, are ready to take any action to dismantle the terror infrastructure across the border. So we
Mm-hmm.
could be in a state where there could be some prolonged pressure. I mean, the whole goal is to see the job through. Now, after Wing Commander Abhinandan got shot down, I mean, as expected, there was a quite a bit of gloom over the Indian faces, and then suddenly the some of these, as I said, the Aman Ki Asha gang became very active, saying like say no to war. But that's the thing, like, even I had wrote earlier this week that in Kargil, during the air operations Safed Sagar, we did had a MiG-21 shot down, a MiG-27 shot down, and a Mi-17 shot down during the first 3 days of the conflict. Now that didn't deter us from completing the job, seeing the job through. We changed our tactics and we hit them hard. So same thing, like we need to revise our tactics and then see how we see the job through, and not leave it just be to some domestic pressure where some people might not have the stomach to see the process finish. Now, as I mentioned, like Pakistan is in dire financial position, so there's
Mm-hmm.
never been a better time in terms of economics, in better times of strategic relevance, where Pakistan is not getting support from anywhere, plus our conventional superiority, where we could target them when necessary, uh, to change the behavior of the Pakistanis in supporting terrorism. So that's all I had, Kishore. Any closing
Perfect.
comments from you in regarding what happens next?
Yeah, I think one point that we kind of missed on elaborating is how we had indicated in our previous episode that right about the time that we had the Pulwama attack, there
Mm-hmm.
were two other attacks, one in Afghanistan and one in Iran, and
Yeah.
both those countries continue to be in a state of high vigilant alert, and
Mm-hmm.
they continue to make aggressive statements targeted at Pakistan. So
Mm-hmm.
Pakistan at this moment is surrounded by three adversaries. They're not none of them are friendly at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
So your point is well taken, Mohal, about how it should not be a one-off step that India should take. Rather, it should be a long, drawn-out, well-thought and well-calibrated
Mm-hmm.
series of steps.
And I think, like, so bringing to one other point, since you brought up Afghanistan, I mean, Afghanistan and Iran have been making the right noises that we threaten to take action similar to India, and they welcome the Indian action. So I think on the Afghanistan side, couple of points. One that I don't know if you already mentioned, like Pakistan threatened to derail the Afghanistan peace talks
Yes,
between the Taliban and
I did.
United States. So on that point, I think from my Afghani sources, I think they are not wanted to take any action till the talks are over, which could be like, I mean, weeks, could be months, because they don't want to disrupt the peace process. So once the peace process is over, I mean, this is all hearsay. So you could possibly see action from the Afghanistan side, which I really doubt, but you never know these days. Like, in these uncertain times, that once the peace talks are over, could there be action? I mean, and the Iranian thing is open since day one, where like the attacks haven't happened. So I mean, the interesting thing is, see, Pakistan has borders with like four countries, like which are unfriendly to it. The airspace is closed, and the only link they have on a land border is in Pakistan occupied Kashmir over the Karakoram highway with China. Even if
Mm-hmm.
China wanted to send supplies, it's the Karakoram pass is closed in the winter months. So basically, once um, you are blocked by air and you are blocked by land completely. I mean, the only route they have is sea, and which you never know what might happen. So like there could be a total shutdown in Pakistan. I think that's why they are preparing for a imminent total shutdown of Pakistan from all the dimensions, air, sea, and land, in the near future, in a confrontation with India.
And that is why they have these regular blackouts in all major
Yeah, I
cities.
think I think they don't have much refining capacity in terms of oil and jet fuel, so they're trying to save it for a possible blockade by India in the future.
Agree, agree. Okay, I think it's a good place to wrap up, Mohan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and discuss our recommendations. My recommendation, I'll go first, Mohal, and my recommendation is actually two pieces that you wrote this last week. I wonder how you were able to make up time for both of them. The first one is actually about lessons from Kargil. India cannot and must not back down now, where you talk about how just one loss of a MiG-21 should not be looked at as a complete failure of the
Mm-hmm.
Indian
Yeah.
military response whenever Pakistan does manage to intrude into Indian airspace, and
Mm-hmm.
India has to continue with its uh, kind of aggressive posture. And you also mentioned about Operation Safed Sagar, which happened during the Kargil War as well. So that is
Mm-hmm.
one article, and the other one is about how should India respond to Pakistan? How can it counter the threat to terrorism? This was kind of it kind of analyzed the whole situation, not only Pulwama but also the aerial incursions that happened, and what was the response from India, and how should it take forward. You've also mentioned a bit about the MFN status and all the other wide spectrum responses that India
Yeah. Full
went
spectrum.
ahead with. Exactly. So yeah, these are the two articles that I would recommend to our listeners. Mohal?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Kishore. So, and for this week, for my recommendation, I would be recommend for our Kannada listeners the video that Kishore did for on oneindia.com about the Balakot airstrike and the Pakistani response on the following day.
Thank you. And dear listeners, I think that wraps up today's episode. It's been quite a lengthy one, but we hope that you enjoyed listening to it as much as we enjoyed talking about it. Uh, to continue hearing about such interesting topics, do subscribe to our channel India Rising. And if you're listening to us on YouTube, don't forget to tap on the bell icon to be notified whenever a new episode becomes available. But if you are listening to us on any podcast, don't forget to subscribe to the show and also leave your review. It helps us to calibrate our episodes further. In addition, we would also like to hear from you if you have any suggestions on any topics that you would like us to cover. Do remember that these topics should be directly related to Indian foreign policy. Until the next time, bye bye.